This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Zach Gorchow. Cheyna, this week, the 15 Republicans who tried to cast Michigan's electoral votes in 2020 for President Trump, even though President Biden won the state by 154,000 votes, won a massive victory in court. Almost 5 years after the events of December 2020, and more than 2 years after Attorney General Dana Nessel charged them with crimes, a Lansing District Court judge ruled the state had failed to demonstrate probable cause that any of the 15 committed a crime, and the judge dismissed the charges.
Zach, it's really hard to believe, but 15 months ago, yes, 15 on our little podcast, we discussed the status of this case after the conclusion of most of the preliminary exams, the hearings to determine whether cases go to trial. Listeners, it's the June 7, 2024 episode, if you want to check it out. And it was pretty clear then that these cases were in trouble. Judge Kristen Simmons back then was unusually critical of the state's case in open court.
And finally, it's over. Cheyna, I always enjoy the chance to tap into your criminal law expertise from your days as a prosecuting attorney. So let me ask you this. In the world of criminal law, for prosecutors, is it generally difficult to get a judge to agree there's enough evidence in a case to send it to trial? And how big a blow is it to have a judge say there's not and dismiss the case?
I once had a law school professor say that you could indict a ham sandwich, meaning that the bar is so low at the preliminary exam stage that if you just got some evidence, that probable cause that the defendant committed the crime, you'll get the case bound over to felony court for trial. And honestly, like a lot of times in the preliminary exam stage, prosecutors don't show all of their evidence. They don't want to tip their hand of what they have necessarily. So they just go in there saying, here's sort of the bare minimum to prove my case. The reason for this is judges tend to try to not interfere in criminal cases to a certain extent. Plus, as I said, that probable cause bar is pretty low. It is not beyond a reasonable doubt. It is just probable cause that the thing happened. However, this was an intent case, and intent is extremely hard to prove. You're basically trying to prove that a person knew a thing, which means you're trying to get in their head. And unless you're Professor X, that is extremely hard to do. And that's what Judge Simmons's ruling rested on. She said, I don't believe there's enough evidence sufficient to prove intent. Is it still surprising that she didn't bind the case over and let some outstanding matters or questions be worked out in federal court, though? Absolutely.
You know, there's some important context here worth noting on Judge Simmons. Not only is this someone whom Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a Democrat, of course, appointed to the court, Simmons is actually a former assistant attorney general who, among other things, has expertise in election law. She only worked at the department for a short time when Dana Nessel was attorney general before Whitmer appointed her to the bench. But still, that's got to be salt in the wounds for the attorney general. It's not like this was some arch conservative judge.
Yeah, it was clear after the preliminary exam that the intent of the electors, as I mentioned, was going to be essential to the case. Judge Simmons made it clear the prosecution failed to demonstrate the electors intended to commit a crime. Most of the electors for both parties are longtime party loyalists who got the gig for their years of work on party causes and would in no way be considered election law experts. And they were saying they just followed instructions from the Trump campaign. All that signing and documenting and sending it to the National Archives would do is help Trump if the courts overturned the election results. That was sort of their purported reasoning for all of this. That's what they kept saying. And again, trying to prove that that isn't what they were thinking is really difficult. Intent crimes are hard.
You know, there's a big unanswered question. Why didn't Nessel and her prosecutors charge the president or any of the other big Trump campaign folks who were involved when they were, actively trying to overturn Michigan's election results that were certified in all 83 counties by bipartisan boards of canvassers, and inquiry after inquiry after inquiry was showing that Michigan's election results were accurate? Nessel met with reporters after the verdict was announced and was asked that very question. Here is what she said.
Yeah, well, many times you receive information about the actions of a particular individual, but it doesn't mean that evidence is admissible in court. And so there are times where you have people that they are co-conspirators, but it doesn't mean that you have the evidence necessary to file that case.
Here's the thing. These are not everyday criminal cases where you have well-trodden case law and precedent. This isn't an armed robbery or a drug case. And for most people, what happened in 2020 might feel wrong, might feel like it should be illegal. But if prosecutors can't find the right statutory box to charge someone with and then have the sufficient evidence to eventually prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, remember, the goal is always beyond a reasonable doubt once you get to that trial stage. If you don't have that, you're not going to get anywhere.
So let's talk a little bit about the aftermath of all this. Republicans let loose years of pent-up anger at Nessel over these charges. A lot of these electors, again, were elderly, longtime party activists. And sadly, one of them, John Haggard, who was in his 80s, had a heart attack a few days before the judge announced her decision. He passed away while still hospitalized shortly after the judge announced her ruling. Further, the prosecution named a number of unindicted co-conspirators, a label I've never really understood because it seems like a way for prosecutors to tar someone without actually having to prove their case in court. Among those were Trump, plus Tom Leonard, the Republican Nessel defeated for Attorney General in 2018, former House Speaker and current candidate for governor.
That's right. So State Representative Matt Maddock, a Milford Republican whose wife, Michonne Maddock, was one of the electors and is a top Trump ally, even said he anticipated Nessel getting charged criminally and vowed to sue Nessel, which good luck to him, because prosecutors have a general immunity from criminal and civil liability. Honestly, the best they could probably hope for, and this is not me giving anybody legal advice, this is my speculation about this. While I do have a bar card, it's currently not active, just so you know. The best they could probably hope for is maybe to file a grievance with the Michigan Bar Association. But even that, that's very unlikely to go anywhere.
Yeah, there's some things they could do to definitely hassle Nessel. Like you said, they could go to the bar, they could go to the Attorney Grievance Commission and make her have to respond to things, but a pretty high bar to reach, no question about it. Now, speaking of Nessel, she said she is weighing an appeal of this decision. This, after all, was just a district court ruling, and it's important, but she could appeal it to the Ingham County Circuit Court. That being said, it would be a long process that surely would eventually work its way up to the Michigan Supreme Court if she did prevail in an appeal at the next level. Based on the slowness of this case, it is hard to believe it would get resolved before Nessel leaves office on January 1, 2027. By then, maybe there's even a Republican attorney general taking office as her successor. And given that both Republican candidates for the job celebrated the judge's ruling, and one of them has even represented one of the electors, it's pretty clear any appeal would be dropped if that's what plays out. Either way, Nessel made it clear she was bitterly disappointed. And to the avalanche of Republican criticism that these were political prosecutions, Nessel countered that her team saw evidence of crimes committed, and to not bring charges because they would be controversial would have been the truly political act.
Well, we're going to switch out our judges' robes and gavels for our calculators and wallets. And after this short break, we're going to talk to a leader in Michigan's local governments about what the state budget stalemate means for your county, city, village, or township. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. I'm Zach Gorchow. Listeners, as you know, we've been on something of a tour this year of the state budget. We've discussed healthcare, schools, colleges, universities, and economic development. Today, we're going to talk about how the state helps fund local governments, your city, your village, township, or county. Joining us is someone who is steeped in the Michigan local government world, Steve Currie. He's executive director of the Michigan Association of Counties. Steve, welcome to MichMash, you and our state's 83 counties.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. One might say the most important part of the budget, but I'll leave that for you guys to decide.
Well, we are definitely going to dig into that. But first, Steve, we We're going to use a term a lot throughout the show today that you and Zach and I know pretty well. Anyone who works in local government probably knows the word well or the term well, but most people probably don't know what it is, and that's revenue sharing. Can you give us sort of your elevator pitch or like your concise explanation of what revenue sharing is and why it matters?
Yeah, so revenue sharing is one of the primary funding mechanisms for local governments across the state. It's basically a portion of the general fund, in this case, a portion of the sales tax that goes out to local governments to fund the mandated services that they're required to provide. So from the county level, we provide the courts, your sheriff's department, clerks, so elections, veteran services. Some counties directly do roads. So all those local public health, community mental health, all those things that not a lot of people think about, counties provide revenue sharing in addition to property taxes fund those.
Can you talk a little bit about the funding and the way this works? There's these different pots of funding for revenue sharing. There's some that is what's called constitutional. And that means part of the sales tax, when anybody buys something, goes to it and it goes into revenue sharing. But of course, as the counties are painfully well aware, that does not include them. It's the cities, villages, and townships, but not the counties. Can you discuss sort of a little bit of the history of that and why it is so important that the state is helping to fund the counties and the local governments, not just relying on property taxes?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're right. So cities, villages, and townships get constitutional revenue sharing and statutory revenue sharing. Constitutional revenue sharing is exactly what you said. It's constitutionally mandated. There's an inflationary number attached to it each year. It grows depending on the rate of the sales tax growth for that particular year. So CVTs, cities, villages, townships get both. Counties only get statutorial. So what does that mean? That means each year the legislature has to appropriate those funds. They typically do it there's actually a formula that's been out there for a while, but it's not really followed. It's more based off the previous year's allocation or appropriation. But each year, the legislature goes through their appropriation process, much like what we're going through now, and appropriates those funds. So they could literally appropriate those funds all the way if they wanted to. They could take it and eliminate statutory revenue sharing if they wanted to. They haven't. We've been very successful over the past 5-10 years actually getting statutorily increased revenue sharing, which has been great. And we hope to continue that with this budget process. We're not quite there yet. I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
So where would counties be without revenue sharing? I mean, there are local property taxes that people pay. So if you took away revenue sharing, what would happen to local governments?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say on average for most counties, it's close to half of their budget is revenue sharing. It's a significant portion of what they bring in. So when you start looking at some of these cuts, looking at let's say the House budget, which is a 12% cut, that's significant dollars, especially in some smaller counties.
So you just hinted at the budget and the discussions going on right now in September, which, as our listeners know, the budget is not done. There's an October 1 deadline for the start of the new fiscal year staring everybody in the face. So the governor's budget proposal from February and the budget the Senate Democratic majority passed earlier this year provide for small increases in revenue sharing to local governments like counties. But the budget the House Republicans passed in late August has a cut from what counties are currently getting. Can you walk us through that cut and the county's assessment of the spending plans?
Sure. So let's take a step back. So the governor's recommendation was a 4% flat increase for revenue sharing. That's typically what we've seen over the years is that the legislature and governor will just do flat increases and call it good. Last year was the first year we saw a little bit of a formula change where there was an increase in revenue sharing, but it was distributed based on your property value. So the higher property value you had in your county, the less you got in revenue sharing. So inverse relationship to property values, which we were fine with. We were okay with that. So now the House budget, to go back to the Senate side, so the Senate had about a $29 million increase based on that distribution model. So 2 increases. Then the House budget actually came in at a $35 million reduction of that. So basically, that was close to what we received last year in an increase in that inverse model, that with the distribution model. So basically took back the increase last year in the House version and eliminated what we received in an increase last year. Now, there's other parts of the budget that, and these are some of the arguments we're hearing. There's a big House road package out there that's significant to counties. There's some public safety dollars that are out there. But when you start looking at some of these, in the House package, the public safety component that they added in there, you have to maintain what you were appropriating at the county last year for your public safety to in order to get that increase. So if you wanted to keep the increase, you have to appropriate what you did last year. But if you're getting a cut this year, it's kind of a double hit now. You're taking away the funds that you used to increase your budget last year this year. So it doesn't really work out.
The counties and your colleagues in cities, villages, and townships have urged the legislature to create a revenue sharing trust fund where some of the sales tax Michigan residents pay when buying things is earmarked for local governments. It got out of the House last year, but it died in the Senate. This year, the House has sent it to a committee where bills traditionally go to die. That specific committee, not that the House in general is where bills go to die. What's your sense of its prospects this year, and why is it important?
Well, the way we've been looking at it and in some of the discussions, and even if you look at some of the testimony that's been out there, like last legislative session, that bill passed out of the House 106-4. Overwhelming bipartisan support. We all know how last year's legislative session ended and we were unable to work it through the Senate and get it to the governor's desk. We've reintroduced those bills with the same bill sponsors this year. I agree that committee typically that's where bills go to die, but we have seen bills fast-tracked out of that committee as well. And obviously this hasn't been fast-tracked, but when you start hearing some of the testimony, because that's been one of our concerns about the road funding plan, is we're supportive of the road funding plan, but let's not do it at the detriment of the general fund dollars for counties. The House passed it overwhelmingly last year. It's our expectation that we'll see movement on it. I'm not sure when. There's not a lot of movement of anything right now, but we are hopeful to see movement on that bill this year.
Another top priority for counties is a long-term road funding solution, as you were hinting at earlier. So depending on the county government or a county road commission is in charge of the roads in townships and many thoroughfares in cities too. I think probably a lot of motorists are looking at what's happening on the state-owned roads, like the interstates and the M routes, and thinking, please, no, not more construction. But the bond money that's being used for that work is not going to counties or cities for local roads. So how dire is the situation for local roads right now?
Yeah, it's bad. That funding that came through for the state roads that you mentioned was great for state trunk line roads. We did not see that increase. Local roads did not see that increase. You now have, the governor talking about a $3 billion plan, the House talking about over $3 billion plan, and prioritizing local roads for that. And when we start digging into it a little more, when you look at the House plan specifically, it's close to 100% increase for local or for county road commissions based on the distribution formula. So it's significant dollars. Let's see if it holds up through the process, but it is significant dollars we are supportive of. But again, we don't want to, those road dollars have to go to a specific purpose. Those road dollars can't then be diverted for the county general fund. So why the county road departments may see that, or road commissions may see that increased funding, we still have a lot of services we have to provide, and that's why the revenue sharing component is still important to us.
What are other priorities for counties with this budget? What are you and your people going to be really advocating for hardest in the coming weeks?
Yeah, so some of the other things I talked about, the public safety, there's the Public Safety Trust Fund, they're kind of calling it. So there's three legs to that. The governor's recommendation was about $75 million. That unfortunately excluded counties from any part of getting any of those funds. You have the Senate plan, which is about $60 million. That provides a lot of flexibility to counties. how to use those funds. So that could be used for courts, specialty courts. There's a real discrepancy with prosecutor pay right now counties are struggling with. So some of those funds could be used for that. And then the House plan had $40 million, but that was devoted to sheriffs. And I mentioned the formula there where you had to maintain your funding. So that public safety component, if it's going to be a part of the budget, we want to make sure those funds are as flexible as possible at the local level because there are increased costs. We talked about the road funding. Again, there's some prosecutorial grants in the budget. The governor didn't have any. The Senate had about $60 million, and the House had about $25 million, again, to help with the discrepancy in prosecutors' costs. And then there's some funding in this governor and Senate budget for problem-solving courts that we're watching as well. By no means an exhaustive list, but some of the higher priority ones.
So the budget has obviously not passed yet, as we've discussed. That July 1 statutory deadline is long gone. October 1 staring us in the face. How does this impact counties and local governments not having a budget yet? And correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like most local governments are on a July 1 fiscal year, but maybe there's a few that are on October 1. Can you educate us on that?
Yeah, we're kind of all over the place. We have some July ones, we have some October ones, we have some calendar year ones. So we're a little bit spread out as far as that goes. And we have surveyed our members to see, hey, what is mission critical? Is it, if we had a shutdown, is it a week? Is it a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months? For the most part, we're hearing from our members in that 2 to 4 month range. If we had that long of a shutdown, then we're at bank accounts being empty, payroll not being met, that sort of thing. I'm hopeful we don't get to that point. But that would be mission critical. I mean, there's a variety of revenue sharing is obviously a huge component of it, but you got friend of the court. You have a lot of different funding mechanisms that come from the state that would be impacted. So it's kind of tough to estimate, but we think that 2 to 4 month range is a pretty good estimate.
Boy, I don't even want to think about a 2 to 4 month shutdown.
You could have a federal government shutdown.
That's true.
I mean, you want to talk about catastrophic.
Yeah.
At the end of September.
Well, Steve, we'd be violating podcast protocol if we didn't at least give you a chance to plug the Michigan Association of Counties podcast. Is it called Podcast 83?
Yeah.
What's it called?
Podcast 83. We kind of do it in a similar format. We do an audio version on all the normal podcast things, and we have a YouTube version as well. We get pretty good coverage on that. We might have to have you guys come on that one and do like a podcast swap and put you guys in the hot seat a little bit.
We're going to hold you to that.
Absolutely.
Yes. Love a good collaboration. Steve, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us, and thanks for being on MichMash.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.